Good evening and welcome everyone to the CityLabs dialogue series. My name is Pratyush Shankar and along with my colleagues, have been handling the CityLabs initiatives. I'm very happy to welcome Professor Christophe Jaffrelot today as our first speaker, first person with whom we are going to have a conversation. And before I introduce Professor Christophe, I would just like to say a few words about CityLab Dialogue Series. As many of you would be aware that CityLabs India is an initiative by a group of us who want to understand Indian cities better. We want to have a better perspective of the evolutionary aspects of Indian cities. And in order to do that, we do seminars, lectures, and essentially writing workshops, writing urban history workshops, where we try and decipher the nature of the evolution of cities. And we believe as architects and as urban designers, we need to have a sense of history to be able to say where we want to go. And those kind of discourses are missing. As part of this effort, we thought to have a dialogue series, not with architects and planners and urban designers, but people from allied or other disciplines that are looking at questions of society, questions of politics, culture, from their own disciplinary kind of experiences, and to pose questions to them that are somewhere in between both the disciplines. I thought of Professor Christophe because I had a wonderful opportunity to interact with him when I was teaching at CEP. We had invited him for a research colloquium, and also to see his wonderful institute when he invited me for a seminar in Paris. And I was mighty impressed by the kind of work they're doing. So before I start the conversation, a little introduction to Professor Christophe Jaffrelot. Christophe Jaffrelot is a senior research fellow at Sciences Po in Paris, where he teaches in 3 different schools. He was also elected president of the French Association of Political Science, AFSP, in July 2020. So congratulations, Christophe, for that. This is huge. We look towards France for all our legacy of political thoughts and philosophers, and I think this is huge. Congratulations for that. Professor Jaffrelot is also a senior editor of CERI Sciences Po book series, Comparative Politics and International Studies, which is published by Hearst, London, and Oxford University Press in New Delhi. He has also been the editor-in-chief of Critique International from 1998 to 2003, and then was his director between 2003 and 2008. He has a long list of achievements and publication, but if I were to summarize that, his current research interest deals with sociology of Indian political personnel, including the members of parliament and members of legislative assemblies. The Dargahs of Ajmer. Now, this was my personal favorite, Christophe, because I did happen to listen to the presentation on the Dargahs. It was a very intriguing topic for me. The Indian-Pakistan relationship, the political history of Gujarat, especially from the point of view of relations between politicians and businessmen in particular, and popular politics. Few of his publications, now we're all familiar with Christophe's work from Indian Express, where we read him very, very regularly. Few of his other publications include India's First Dictatorship, The Emergency, 1975 to 77, Majoritarian State, How Hindu Nationalism is Changing India, Hindu Nationalism, a Reader, Religion, Caste and Politics in India, and more. And as I said, he has also been a regular columnist for Indian Express. In fact, his work on Juapura was a very good reference for many of our students who went on to do more spatial studies there. So welcome, Christophe, to the CityLabs Dialogue.
Thank you, Pratyush.
So without wasting too much time, Christophe, let me fire up with some questions. And as I said, we're trying to also bridge a disciplinary gap here. It's not really a gap, but we're trying to also see your perspective coming from social and political science perspective. But before I get into some content-related topic, I would just I'm very curious, and I think all of us are curious to understand your journey. How did you get so much interested in India and Pakistan what is your connection with the country? And what has been your story like, if I may ask a slightly personal, professional question?
Well, it's an old story now because everything started when I was 18, when I was in my philosophy class with a teacher who literally initiated me into philosophies and religions of Asia and India in particular, including Sufism, Buddhism, and of course Hinduism. So I went to India for the first time when I was 20, and I traveled across the country from Delhi to Bodh Gaya, from Bodh Gaya to Ajmer, and visited many places. That was 1984. That was a very, very special year. I arrived just after the Blue Star operation, and I left just before Mrs. Gandhi's assassination. And I kept coming one year after the other, every year for now 37 years almost. And what I did first was to work on Hindu nationalists, on what they achieved primarily in Madhya Pradesh. That was an understudied part of India. It remains rather understudied, by the way. And then I moved on, worked on caste politics. I read Babasaheb Ambedkar's books, and I taught for 3-4 years on what he was saying as a sociologist, as an anthropologist. And I decided to write a biography of Babasaheb Ambedkar. And I'm one of my, I would say, most significant achievements in that sense is that the book is now available not only in French, in English, but also in Hindi, in Tamil, and it should come out in Marathi very soon. So that's something I value a lot, because we need to enter this domain of the vernaculars. So after caste politics and a book on the rise of OBCs in North India, I continued to work on Muslims in India primarily, and I co-edited a book on Muslims in Indian cities. That was 2009, and that will take us to the cities, because I visited and lived in so many Indian cities, of course the big ones, but also Bhopal, a place where I stayed when I was doing fieldwork, Pune, Ajmer, Agra, Lucknow, so many. And I share your concern and your interest in the cities, Pratyush. Just one word about Pakistan, because very few people can follow both countries, and I make a point to do it, and I make a point to go every year to both countries, and it's important to do it. Also to see how both countries are still part of the same civilization, especially in terms of cities. You know, the urban landscape on both sides of the border is so similar. And the urbanization process is also so similar. So I really think that it's valuable if people like me, and if possible, many others, could continue to cover both countries. And we may return to that in the conversation. But yes, what is behind is a civilization, and an urban civilization in the first place.
No, I mean, and also in my own research on urban history of India, even though this book is about India, but we had to cover so many cities in Pakistan, because you cannot ignore as part of the shared culture. And I remember your comment about a very active civil society in Pakistan when you had come to CEP, because there is this kind of a skepticism about Pakistan as being a very closed country.
Yeah, no, it is a closed country for, well, like many others, but it doesn't mean that nobody resists. And in fact, civil society activists and the media have shown a lot of courage.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to connect to Baba Saheb Ambedkar, just a little trivia piece of history. Uh, I'm sure you might be aware, but Ambedkar's education in the US was sponsored by the King of Baroda. Yeah. And I think he writes his contribution in sponsoring his, I guess, a PhD in the US. And then, and in some of my recent work, I've been looking at Baroda as a place of what we're calling as indigenous modernities. Yeah. That also managed to create kind of a counter-colonial narrative by inviting these thinkers and writers to find literally an asylum in the city during that period.
Oh, the Gaikwad was amazing. Absolutely amazing. And another one was, of course, the Maharaja of Kolhapur, because Shahu Maharaj in the first place, and then others helped Ambedkar and others. Now, that was a time when Maratha Maharajas were very supportive of Dalit education, for instance.
Right.
They were progressive. This is counterintuitive. You can't imagine that Maharajas can be progressive, but they were definitely.
Sure. In fact, that's where I feel, it is the city that became sites of modernity or some form of indigenous modernities, progressive experiments around that period, which also holds a lot of lessons for us, something that has not been written much about. Yeah. Because I think many times the question of modern architecture is a question we pick up after independence, from the time of high modernity, Le Corbusier, etc. So, Christophe, connected to your first point, and I can imagine, 80s, around the time when you were there, this is a Blue Star operation time and Indira Gandhi is assassinated. I was growing up as a kid in Delhi. And what a place to be in terms of what all was happening. Yeah. And I was just wondering, and I met a lot of his students in San Francisco, and I was amazed by the amount of field work those guys were doing. Tell us something about it, because this is a very important lesson, the value of field work.
Yeah, that's part of the French tradition of political science. Of course, history of ideas matters a lot, but fieldwork also, sociology, if you want, political sociology is our trademark. And you can even say political anthropology, at least ethnography. In contrast to the American system or tradition, where data matter more, you have to give numbers. That's really required. In our case, you can do a PhD based only on qualitative interviews, which goes also with history, because most of the time we invite the students also to go deeply in history. So indeed, at Sciences Po, we have this tradition, of course. And now that we have internationalized the faculty and, of course, the recruitment of students, we try to transmit this methodology in seminars, and it's very interesting to see Indian students coming to us in large numbers. I must say we have created a kind of ecosystem with dozens of Indian students who, of course, attend the courses, the class, but also come to our seminars and find affinities between this way to do social sciences and an Indian tradition. Because for me, the crucibles of political science in India, the CSDS that Rajni Kothari had started in the 60s, but also the department of GNU, the Center for Policy Research and so on, CPR, all these places have these affinities with, if you want, fieldwork-based social sciences. And it doesn't mean that you do not need to do databases to compile data. In fact, we are involved with Ashoka University. Sciences Po and Ashoka Universities university are good partners. We are involved in the making of a data set, and you referred to it in the introduction, Pratyush, when you said that we were working on the political personnel. Yeah, a data set of MPs and MLAs. But right. You realize that when you have a data set like this one to build, you need to know society. How will you quantify things you do not know, I would say, in detail? No. If you want to do a very useful data set, you don't look at SCSTs. You look at the, I would say, subgroups in these aggregates. And that requires an intimate knowledge of society. So for me, we should never divorce the quantity and the qualitative approaches, but certainly my tradition, my cup of tea, so to speak, is more on the ethnographic side, and I've come and gone and spent so much time in India for that.
No, I think it's kind of, it's inspiring and also methodologically speaking, very useful for many. Increasingly, we are finding students who are not satisfied just making a pretty building. They want to solve, they want to engage with the society, and they want to understand how making spaces can touch the society, or making architecture can touch the society. So in that sense, there's a lot to learn from your discipline. Now coming to a more technical question, and this is in some sense related to the question of ghettoisation, which you very clearly articulate with the example of Juapura. A very strong kind of an example. In my own work, when I've been looking at medieval Indian cities, there seems to be an absence of what I would like to call a common ground, or a public, truly a public place. It comes, it goes, we don't see a real pattern emerging. So one of the arguments that I've been looking at is how the fact that cities were not really able to realize their true potential because historically communities tend to form their own strong territories. Do you find the ghettoisation that you mentioned, which was more contemporary, as related to Hindu-Muslim tensions, a continuation of a historical spatial trajectory, or would you see it with a special lens? How would you see that?
Yeah, very good question. Well, in fact, I would say that there is a difference only in degree to some extent, but when differences in degree increase, they sometimes become different in kind and in essence. There is a difference in degree only if you consider that Indian cities indeed have always been very fragmented according to social considerations, to social criteria. In fact, if you go back to the Vastu Shastras,
right,
you realize that the ideal city is not a place where people meet, at least where people mix. They should not mix. No, it's of course very much parallel to the caste system and the endogamy of the caste system. Same here, you have this square that is the ideal plan for the city, and within this big square you have smaller squares. In the middle is of course the royal palace and the Brahmin neighborhood, and then other castes will be located in other neighborhoods, if you want, blocks, if we use the words of the American planners. And another principle for location is directionality. High caste are located in the east and north, or face those directions. So society is like a microcosm of some order, of some, you can say cosmic, you can say social order, but mixity is not supposed to be there. Now, That said, we could see in the course of time that instead of being made of silos, cities became much more mosaic-like. And I very much like this metaphor, especially when you look at cities like Ahmedabad, the old Ahmedabad, where the poles were like the basic unit or basic units of a large mosaic. And of course, in one pole, you'll have people of one community only. But in the next pole, they'll be of a different community. So even if they do not interact, at least they know that they are, you can say, coexisting together. And the Hindus will hear the muezzin calling for azan, and the Muslims will hear the bell of the temple, the Jain temple or the Hindu temple. So this idea that you are not mixing but coexisting developed somewhat. And that's probably also true in particular of the Islamic city, because Islamic cities were developed also with people coming from all over the Muslim world. So some of them were from Persia, from Turkey, from the Turkish-speaking world, and when they started cities, they regrouped according to their ethnic, ethno-linguistic background. So it's the mosaic pattern. Now you can say that this mosaic pattern has been very badly affected by all kinds of developments, including violence, and definitely communal riots, especially in a place like Ahmedabad, 69, 85, 92, 2002, so many violence in Ahmedabad that has become the most riot-prone city in India, by the way, if you look at the per capita number of casualties. So that has resulted in more separation, and Muslims have been driven out in such a way that Ahmedabad is the only place where you have more Muslims out of the walled city than within the walled city. Correct. So it has reached a point when you can say that it's not a difference in degree anymore, it's a difference in kind, and Juapura can be seen as a separate city to some extent. In fact, we have just finished and published with Sharik Lalivala a new report for Ashmander on Juapura, and we could see after revisiting the place after so many years that it was a city on its own in many ways, with one paradox. The fact is that you need to pay so much for a square meter, a yard meter now in a place like Juapura, that the poor may have to go out. What used to be a slum became a ghetto. What is a ghetto is maybe transforming itself into an enclave, or at least you will have enclaves within the ghetto. Yeah, which is a fascinating trajectory, really.
Correct, and also, I mean, Juapura is a mosaic within also.
Exactly. And that's why it's a city in itself. You know, you can't say it's a ghetto. It's not true. It's a proper city in a way, with its own neighborhoods, with its own inner differentiation. But I think it's true of any ghetto, simply because a ghetto is not a slum. A ghetto is a place where you go for safety because you're of the wrong religion or the wrong race. You know, we do remember where the word comes from. It comes from Venice, where you had the Jews in two different parts of the city of Venice, and it was ghetto. And these Jews were from so many different social backgrounds. Where were they there? Because they were Jews, not because they were poor. They were not poor.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's a very good perspective to the problem, and I think it really makes us think and wonder what is really happening to our city today as a continuation of a certain pattern and an accentuation of that idea. Let me just, change tracks here and take you to this question of the Sufi Dargah. And I was fascinated by this question from a very, very academic reason, because Christoph, while we were researching on the Deccan cities, many of the Deccan cities, it seems that the city itself, there is an abject absence of any place of gathering. But outside the city, the tomb of the Sufi saint or the Dargah or the sacred space of the Sufi person would be actually the public place, the popular public place where people would go. And I'm somehow tempted to kind of raise this construct of an idea of a city which is seen to be materialistic and corrupt, and the countryside as kind of epitomized by the Sufis, or nature as something which is pristine and pure. How would you kind of, attempt this binary?
Yeah, this is fascinating, because in fact, each city almost has a kind of Sufi saint patron. And this relationship is very important. I would say it's important from 2 points of view. First of all, you have this idea that the city is protected by this Sufi saint. Mm-hmm. And that's something, interestingly, that was recognized by Iltutmish himself when he started the Delhi Sultanate.
Yes.
Saying that, well, I'm in power because of the barakah of the Sufi saints. And the Sufi saints should continue to protect the city, and the city should certainly respect them and revere them. And Nizamuddin Aulia is definitely the saint patron of Delhi for a long time now, for a long time. But the other point is that indeed you do not have any public space in the city. There is no place where people can meet that easily. The place where you can meet easily is that Dargah, where we are not asked who you are.
Wow.
You may be anybody.
Yeah.
Nobody cares.
Right.
By the way, this is something Anant Taneja shows so well in his book on the Dargahs of Delhi.
Right.
So you are there as a human being, and people can be of different religions. Many non-Muslims go to Dargahs. They may be Hindus, they may be Sikh people, they may be Christians. It makes no difference. So this is like the otherworldly scene that you need vis-a-vis society, because if there was no asceticism in which you can find equality and fraternity and brotherhood, society would explode. Well, similarly, here is a place, here is a site, a physical site, where you can escape precisely your social and urban rigidities. So I do think that there is a dialectic, and I think we should have bus services for going to Dargahs. That should be mandatory.
Yeah, I think you become an anonymous stranger in a Dargah, truly, which you cannot be in the city. But that's a fascinating. I mean, I've noted these points: the otherworldly space that allows you to release the tension of a religious identity or a caste identity. I think that's a wonderful framework. And I think it's a wonderful framework for us as architects, planners.
Yeah, you have to invent liminal spaces as well.
Absolutely.
To breathe.
Yeah, wonderful. I come towards the end of this interview with a very hot topic. It is not really about Central Vista project, but a larger kind of a concern. And when we look at projects such as the Ambedkar Memorial Park in Lucknow, or projects like even the Central Vista project. And I'm just curious, I mean, we know what's happening for sure, but I'm just curious how we can see space, and this is an idea of a space, a grand plan, a scheme of things, as a way to read the society in a more perceptive fashion, in a more qualitative fashion. And if you were to kind of analyze these such kind of projects, what do they say about, how can we, what are they saying to us? What are they telling us?
Well, they are telling us when a strong man or a strong woman wants to convey a message, a political message, or a social message, to transform the urban space remains an instrument, remains an important instrument. So it means, by the way, that we are not at all in a virtual world, contrary to what we claim. You know, it will not be enough to bombard you by WhatsApp messages. You know, to make the point, and to make the point more permanent, you want to change the city landscape, the cityscape, in fact. So that's what, in fact, we have always seen. Do remember the beatification, quote unquote, attempts by Sanjay Gandhi during the emergency.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You were kind enough to refer to the book I have just co-authored with Pratyush Anil on the emergency. We have one full chapter on what Sanjay and Mrs. Gandhi did to Delhi to make Shahjahanabad great again. And Jagmohan was, of course, very much involved in this as the urban planner in chief. So that's one example. What you say about Lucknow is another example. What Narendra Modi is doing to Delhi is the next example.
Correct.
We've seen this in so many places, you know, especially when you have the will to assert how grand your power is. So the more authoritarian the leader is, the bigger the work should be too. Mussolini transformed Roma completely. And of course, Stalin changed Moscow. So to leave this legacy, stadiums are not enough. You need more than stadiums. You need to change the face of the city for good. That's significant of a political assertion, a political message, and it shows how important cities and architectures remain.
Absolutely. No, I think it's very nicely said, and it's also very interesting. And I've also been wondering about the popular support of these projects.
Usually they are supportive. You know, yes. People are supportive of their own grandeur. You know, what? Yes, we can, in this sense, change the face of our city to assert our identity, our power. It's like building a temple. You know, it shows that you can win over others and you can show the world how great you are. Well, people love that.
Yeah.
Even at the expense of the legacy of the past.
Absolutely. And that also shows that, you know, the big disconnect as we in academia being critical, but on the ground, there's a groundswell support for many of these initiatives, be it the Sardar statue or be it the Ambedkar Memorial or
Oh, yes. No, politicians know the pulse of the people better than we do academics. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
In that particular case, by the way, there is an additional factor. You also decolonize Delhi by transforming Delhi. So it's not only nationalism, it's post-colonial nationalism. Absolutely. So it's an important explanation also. I mean, it's a very important variable to factor in for understanding the popularity of such a move.
Yeah. Wonderful, Christophe. I think this is fascinating, wonderful insight, I would say, of a fairly complex topic that architecture students and even young academics face. And I think I really appreciate the kind of clarity you bring in.
You had the good questions, Pratyush, and it's a great initiative. I will follow the series. I will.
Yes, wonderful. Thanks for this. Thanks for finding time at such a short notice. I thank you, Christophe. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome, Pratyush.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.